The day he handed me the divorce papers, he wore that same polite, rehearsed smile he always reserved for uncomfortable conversations. It was the kind of smile that pretended everything was normal, while silently admitting the world had gone to hell. I took the papers, my hands steady, my heart deceptively calm. I had imagined this moment countless times, not the signing itself, but the quiet power that would come after. "I don't want a fight," I said softly, watching his eyes flicker with relief. "No claims, no alimony, nothing except—" My voice hesitated, but only for a moment before I continued. "I want to take your mother with me." The room went silent. His eyes widened not in anger, but in disbelief. The corners of his mouth twitched like he was trying to smile and fail. "You want her?" he asked, incredulous. "You know she's—" His voice trailed off. "Yes," I said, "I'll take her, and I'll make sure she's comfortable. I won't ask for anything else." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I could see the gears turning in his mind, calculating the cost, weighing the consequences. Then he reached for his wallet. "Fine," he said, $5000, take her, just get out of my life." I nodded, accepted the check, and handed him back the papers. No celebration, no gloating. I left the room as composed as I had entered it, but inside, something fierce and unyielding began to stir. I could feel it in my chest, a quiet, burning satisfaction that no one, not him, not anyone else, would ever see coming. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt the strangest combination of freedom and anticipation. The freedom was obvious. I was leaving behind the arguments, the silences, the suffocating expectation of a life I hadn't chosen. But the anticipation, that was something else. It was the thrill of knowing I had claimed the one thing that might make him squirm, the one detail he hadn't seen coming. He had always underestimated me, always assumed I would fold, that I would beg, that I would be another version of the submissive woman he thought he married. But no, this was my move, quiet, deliberate, and brilliant in its simplicity. I thought about my soon-to-be roommate in this new chapter of life. His mother, fragile in appearance but sharp in mind, had always been the one constant in his life he had never been able to control completely. And now she would be mine, well, not mine exactly, but she would be under my roof, bound to me in ways I intended to explore carefully. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was strategy, and in a way, it was a test of character for both of them. That evening, I unpacked the small amount of things I had taken from the house, each item a reminder of a life that had ended and a new one beginning. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, but it was mine. Soon it would be filled with her, my mother-in-law. I imagined her walking through the door, uncertain, clinging to habits and routines I would patiently observe. I smiled to myself. There was power in waiting, in watching, in letting others underestimate you while you quietly arrange the pieces. I remembered the nights he would sigh loudly at the dinner table, pretending not to notice my presence. The subtle jabs, the unspoken criticisms, the way he had always believed he was in control. I had let him believe that. I had played the perfect wife when I needed to, and the perfect listener when I didn't. But now the game had changed, and the board was mine. By the time the check cleared, I felt a strange, guilty delight. $5,000 to free myself from a life of quiet torment, to gain a companion who could become an ally or a pawn, either way, a future ripe with possibilities. I placed the money in my drawer, but I didn't touch it. The real wealth was not the cash. It was the knowledge that I had outmaneuvered him without raising my voice, without making a scene, without letting him even imagine what was coming. I sat down, exhaling slowly, feeling a storm inside me that was quiet, restrained, and ready. This was only the beginning. The calm before the storm, some might say. But for me, it was the start of a new chapter, a chapter where I would write my own rules, where the people who underestimated me would discover that the sweetest victories are often the ones served quietly with patience and precision, and in that silence I smiled. He had no idea. When she arrived, I could barely hide my amusement behind a welcoming smile. My mother-in-law stepped into my apartment with a delicate air of caution, her frail frame carefully balanced on a polished cane. Her eyes darted around the room, sizing up the space, as though measuring whether it met her exacting standards. I offered her a chair, helped her with her coat, and made a cup of tea. Small gestures, all carefully measured. She didn't know it yet, but the true measure of control had shifted. "You've made it quite cozy," she said, her voice soft but tinged with suspicion. "Not what I expected from you," I smiled, setting the cup in front of her. "Thank you. I thought you might like it. I want you to feel at home here, home." The word hung between us like a delicate trap. She looked at me, searching for hidden motives, but all I offered was calm, patient attention. She exhaled slowly, seeming to relax, if only slightly. Over the next few days, I observed her carefully. Every twitch, every sigh, every habit she clung to revealed more about her than she intended. The way she arranged the cushions just so, the way she inspected the pantry, the way she subtly corrected my table settings. It all told me about control, about pride, about the unspoken rules she lived by, and I listened quietly, patiently, strategically. It was during these early days that I realized something important. She was like water, shifting and flowing according to the shape of the container. I just needed to become that container. I smiled to myself, realizing the power of patience. There was no rush. The strongest victories were often invisible at first, unfolding slowly like a careful bloom. She began to share stories, small, nostalgic anecdotes about my ex-husband, tales of his childhood triumphs and failures, his quirks and his stubbornness. I listened, nodding, asking gentle questions, and all the while storing each detail like a treasure. Her loyalty to her son was immense, but not blind. She remembered everything, every slight, every disappointment, every betrayal. She carried them quietly, waiting for the right moment to reveal them, or, in my case, to be guided toward them. Yet, despite her sharp mind, she began to depend on me. She would ask for small favors, help with laundry, a cup of tea at odd hours, company during long afternoons. I fulfilled them willingly, never letting her see the calculating edge beneath my hospitality. She believed she was still in control, that I was merely accommodating her whims. Little did she know that with every passing day, I was learning, understanding, and gently steering. I discovered that she had old grudges, slights my ex-husband had long forgotten. She still carried resentment for decisions he had made that disregarded her advice. And she trusted me enough to voice them, softly, almost in passing, as if I were a confidante rather than a carefully attentive host. I noted each one, imagining how the weight of her words could eventually reshape his world. There was an almost intoxicating sweetness in this quiet game. Not cruelty exactly, it was more like planting seeds in fertile soil and waiting for the roots to take hold. The more I listened, the more I realized that she was not just a mother-in-law to be endured. She was a person of depth, pride, and subtle influence. And she was, unknowingly, a key to the very justice I had in mind. One evening, as we sipped tea by the window, she sighed deeply. "You've made this place comforting," she said. "I wasn't sure how I'd manage without my son, without my routines, but," she paused, searching my face. "You're not as cold as I feared." I smiled, carefully keeping my tone warm but measured. "I'm glad. I want you to feel safe here." She looked out the window, lost in thought. "It's strange," she said. "I never thought I'd find comfort in a home without my son, but somehow this feels right. I nodded, pretending humility, but inside, a quiet thrill coursed through me. This was more than comfort. This was influence, trust, connection. She had no idea how important she had just become, not just as company, but as the instrument through which the next chapter of my plan would unfold. By the time she went to bed that night, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, sipping my own tea. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. The storm of the past was behind me, but a different one was rising, a storm that would be quiet, subtle, and devastating in its precision. And I, for the first time since the divorce, felt completely, intoxicatingly in control. A month had passed since she moved in, and the apartment had settled into a rhythm that felt almost domestic, but it was far from ordinary. My mother-in-law, once sharp and unyielding, had begun to rely on me in ways she would have scoffed at under my ex-husband's roof. She still retained her dignity, her sharp wit, her ability to cut through trivialities with a single glance, but beneath that veneer, a quiet dependence had begun to grow. I noticed it in small ways at first, how she would leave her knitting half finished for me to fetch a cup of tea, how she asked me to read aloud from her letters or organize her schedules. She had never asked her son for such things, but here with me she did, and I watched, studied, catalogued every nuance of her habits. It was intoxicating, in a subtle, patient way, the realization that influence could be so quiet, so effective. She didn't see it yet. She believed she was adjusting to a new routine, finding comfort in the unfamiliar. She had no idea that I was learning her, mapping her, discovering the exact threads that could be pulled to unravel the man who had thought himself clever enough to dismiss me with a check and a sigh. Her stories continued, often veiled as casual reminiscences. She spoke of my ex-husband's pride, his insecurities, and his tendency to underestimate anyone who dared contradict him. "Your father always thought he could handle everything alone," she said one afternoon, sipping her tea. "But sometimes he forgot that not everything bends to his will." I nodded, feigning interest, while a quiet smile touched my lips. Every detail she divulged became a puzzle piece, a key that could unlock the perfect moment of poetic justice. She didn't realize it, but she was already participating in the plan. The way one unknowingly waters the seed that will bloom long after the gardener has gone. Then came the moments that tested her patience and, secretly, revealed her vulnerabilities. I discovered the routines she clung to, the tiny rituals that she believed defined her life. A misplaced cushion could ruin her day. A misaligned picture frame could trigger subtle annoyance. I began to accommodate them, allowing her to feel secure, to believe she was still in control, while quietly steering her thoughts toward my vision of justice. One evening I found her staring at an old photograph of my ex-husband as a boy, her eyes softened, a flicker of regret crossing her face. "He wasn't always perfect," she murmured, "but I always tried to guide him. Sometimes I wonder if I failed." Her voice trembled just slightly, and I reached out, placing my hand over hers. "You did your best," I said softly. "That's all anyone can do." She looked at me, then really looked, as if for the first time seeing me not as a daughter-in-law, not as a rival, but as someone who understood her. And in that moment, I realized how delicately trust had woven itself between us. It was a fragile thread, but strong enough to bend her loyalties, and strong enough to direct them. With each passing day, the balance of power shifted, imperceptibly at first, then more clearly. She began to share opinions she might never have voiced to her son, observations about his behavior, and the small regrets she had long buried. I listened carefully, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking a question, and she continued to open herself in ways that would have seemed impossible a month ago. The thrill of this quiet dominance was unlike anything I had expected, not cruelty, not spite, at least not yet. This was strategy, this was preparation. And with her unwitting cooperation, I could create a situation so devastatingly ironic that the memory of the $50 check would feel like a cruel joke to him. I imagined the day when she would speak, when the careful bonds of loyalty, trust, and shared understanding would intersect with his world in a way that could not be ignored. The man who had dismissed me as a quiet, compliant wife would be forced to witness the consequences of underestimating me, and it would come not from my hands directly, but from someone he had always revered. For now, we moved through our days like a well-oiled machine, a mother and daughter, in-law bound by routines, small comforts, and carefully nurtured trust. But beneath that calm surface, currents churned, tides shifting invisibly. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and when it came, it would be precise, elegant, and entirely unexpected. And as I watched her tuck herself into bed one night, murmuring softly about plans for tomorrow, I smiled quietly to myself. The storm was coming, and this time it would be mine to direct. It had been just over a month since she had moved in, and the atmosphere in the apartment had transformed. What had started as careful observation and patient manipulation had blossomed into a bond neither of us had expected. She trusted me, relied on me, and confided in me in ways she never had with my ex-husband. And now, it was time for the quiet storm we had been preparing to strike. The call came late one morning. My ex-husband's voice, strained and impatient, echoed through the phone. "Have you spoken to my mother?" he asked, a faint tremor of irritation in his tone. "I need to know she's okay." His words faltered. I let him hang there, holding the line with perfect composure. "Yes, she's fine," I said finally, my voice calm, almost sweet. "But she's different. She seems very happy here." There was a pause. I could almost hear his mind working, trying to decipher my tone. But it was too late. The seeds had already taken root. "She's happy without me?" he asked incredulously, disbelief threading through every syllable. "Yes," I said simply, "and she's been telling me things you might want to hear." By the time he arrived at her door a week later, expecting to find a worried mother, he was greeted by a confident, poised woman who looked at him not with the eyes of a worried mother, but with the sharp, discerning gaze of someone who had quietly witnessed everything. "Mother," he said, attempting warmth, but his words fell flat. She held up a hand, cutting him off. "No, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "I've realized so much while staying here, so much you never acknowledged, decisions you made, actions you took, all of them affected more than just you, and I can no longer stay silent." I watched from the kitchen doorway, unseen, a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. She continued, her words precise, carefully chosen. She spoke of his arrogance, his disregard for her advice, the dismissals, the subtle cruelties that had piled up over the years. She reminded him, in front of me, of every mistake, every slight, every moment of pride that had hurt her and others. His face turned pale. You can't be serious," he stammered. She's exaggerating, am I?" She interrupted, calm and unwavering. "Or have you finally realized that the world doesn't bend to your will?" I stepped into the room, smiling faintly, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I think she's being very honest," I said softly, "and she's right to be. You've underestimated both of us for too long." He stumbled back, anger and disbelief warring on his face. This isn't fair," he shouted, but it was too late. His mother's loyalty had shifted subtly, irrevocably. She had discovered the satisfaction of her own voice, guided carefully by mine, and she wielded it with precision. In that moment, the full impact of my quiet revenge struck him. The $50 he had paid me, meant as a relief, now felt like a cruel joke. He had thought he was dismissing me easily, leaving me powerless and small. Instead, he had inadvertently armed me with the very person he trusted most, his mother. And now she spoke truths he could no longer ignore, truths that cut through his pride and exposed the arrogance he had cloaked in confidence for years. When he left, defeated and humiliated, the room settled into a calm I had never felt before. My mother-in-law turned to me, a faint, almost mischievous smile on her lips. "I didn't realize I could do this," she murmured. "You always could," I said, my voice soft. "You just needed the right moment and the right person to remind you." She laughed quietly, a sound filled with relief and newfound empowerment. And in that laughter, I felt the final piece of satisfaction settle. Revenge had been served, not with cruelty, but with patience, strategy, and understanding. It was the sweetest kind because it required no lies, no deception beyond what she already knew to be true, and no violence beyond the truth itself. As I watched her settle into the apartment that evening, comfortable and confident, I felt a deep, quiet joy. This was more than revenge. It was liberation for her, for me, for the life I had carefully reclaimed. And in that calm, I understood that some victories didn't need to be loud to be devastatingly effective. For the first time since the divorce, I smiled freely, knowing that the storm had passed, but its echo would linger in the one life that had once dismissed me, and it would never be forgotten.